Imagine a book that has been read by thousands of the world's most brilliant minds, yet understood by none. Imagine a physical object, crafted by human hands, that has successfully defied the collective intelligence of the FBI, the codebreakers of Bletchley Park, the most advanced artificial intelligence algorithms of the 21st century, and a century's worth of obsessive historians. This is not a work of fiction. It is a stack of 240 pages of ancient calfskin, covered in a fluid, elegant script that resembles no known language on Earth, and filled with illustrations of plants that do not exist, zodiac signs that defy astronomical logic, and naked women bathing in strange interconnected green vats. This is the Voynich Manuscript, and it is the most beautiful, frustrating, and terrifying enigma in the history of human communication. For over 100 years, it has sat in the darkness of libraries and vaults, whispering a secret that no one can hear. We call it boring history, because on the surface, it is just an old book. But beneath that vellum skin lies a puzzle that might suggest our understanding of the Middle Ages, or even human consciousness itself, is fundamentally flawed. Our story begins in 1912, at the Villa Mondragone, a grand Jesuit college near Rome. Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish-American book dealer with a reputation for sniffing out rare and forgotten treasures, was browsing through a chest of old manuscripts that the Jesuits were quietly selling to raise funds for the restoration of their villa. Voynich was a man who knew the value of ink and parchment, but as he pulled one particular volume from the bottom of the trunk, his breath caught. It was a small book, about 9 inches tall and 6 inches wide, bound in a heavy, unremarkable vellum cover. But when he opened it, he didn't find the Latin prayers of the Greek philosophy he expected. Instead, he found a nightmare of beautiful confusion. The script was written from left to right, without a single correction, crossing out, or hesitation. It flowed like the handwriting of a master scribe, yet the letters were unrecognizable, loops, curves, and strange ligatures that seemed to mock the very idea of an alphabet. Voynich bought the book, convinced he had found a lost work of Roger Bacon, the 13th century Franciscan friar and polymath, often credited with being a precursor to modern science. He spent the rest of his life trying to prove it, and in doing so, he invited the world into a rabbit hole that has no bottom. To understand why this book is so uniquely unsettling, we have to look at. Imagine a book that has been read by thousands of the world's most brilliant minds, yet understood by none. Imagine a physical object, crafted by human hands, that has successfully defied the collective intelligence of the FBI, the codebreakers of Bletchley Park, the most advanced artificial intelligence algorithms of the 21st century, and a century's worth of obsessive historians. This is not a work of fiction. It is a stack of 240 pages of ancient calfskin, covered in a fluid, elegant script that resembles no known language on Earth, and filled with illustrations of plants that do not exist, zodiac signs that defy astronomical logic, and naked women bathing in strange interconnected green vats. This is the Voynich Manuscript, and it is the most beautiful, frustrating, and terrifying enigma in the history of human communication. For over 100 years, it has sat in the darkness of libraries and vaults, whispering a secret that no one can hear. We call it boring history, because on the surface, it is just an old book. But beneath that vellum skin lies a puzzle that might suggest our understanding of the Middle Ages, or even human consciousness itself, is fundamentally flawed. Our story begins in 1912, at the Villa Mondragone, a grand Jesuit college near Rome. Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish-American book dealer with a reputation for sniffing out rare and forgotten treasures, was browsing through a chest of old manuscripts that the Jesuits were quietly selling to raise funds for the restoration of their villa. Voynich was a man who knew the value of ink and parchment, but as he pulled one particular volume from the bottom of the trunk, his breath caught. It was a small book, about 9 inches tall and 6 inches wide, bound in a heavy, unremarkable vellum cover. But when he opened it, he didn't find the Latin prayers of the Greek philosophy he expected. Instead, he found a nightmare of beautiful confusion. The script was written from left to right, without a single correction, crossing out, or hesitation. It flowed like the handwriting of a master scribe, yet the letters were unrecognizable, loops, curves, and strange ligatures that seemed to mock the very idea of an alphabet. Voynich bought the book, convinced he had found a lost work of Roger Bacon, the 13th century Franciscan friar and polymath, often credited with being a precursor to modern science. He spent the rest of his life trying to prove it, and in doing so, he invited the world into a rabbit hole that has no bottom. To understand why this book is so uniquely unsettling, we have to look at what it actually contains. The manuscript is generally divided into 6 sections, based on the nature of its illustrations. The first is the herbal section. Page after page features large, detailed drawings of plants. At a glance, they look like standard medieval botanical illustrations. But look closer. A leaf from one species is attached to the stem of another. The roots look like animal organs or strange geometric patterns. Not a single plant in the entire manuscript has been definitively identified as a species that exists on this planet. It is a flora of a world that is not ours. Following the botanical section, the manuscript moves into the astrological and astronomical. There are circular diagrams, some with suns and moons that possess human faces, surrounded by dozens of tiny naked figures. These figures, mostly women, are often depicted emerging from stars or holding objects that look like cosmic instruments. Then comes the most bizarre portion of the book, the balneological section. Here, the illustrations show groups of women, often referred to as nymphs, immersed in pools of green fluid. These pools are connected by a complex system of pipes and tubes that resemble remarkably like human veins, or perhaps an advanced hydraulic system. The women appear to be interacting with the fluid in a way that suggests a ritual or a biological process that we simply don't have a name for. It is clinical, yet surreal, a medical textbook for a biology that doesn't exist. As Wilfred Voynich obsessed over his acquisition, he found a letter tucked inside the cover. This letter, dated 1665 or 1666, was written by Johannes Marcus Marci, a rector of Charles University in Prague. The letter was addressed to Athanasius Kircher, a famous Jesuit scholar of the time, known for his attempts to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs. Marci explained that the manuscript had once belonged to Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II, who believed it was the work of Roger Bacon and had purchased it for the staggering sum of 600 gold ducats, roughly $30,000 in today's money. The letter also mentioned that the book had passed through several hands, including those of Jacobus Sinopius, the personal physician to Rudolf II. This provided a historical trail, a breadcrumb path leading back to the 17th century court of Prague, a place obsessed with alchemy, the occult, and the search for the philosopher's stone. But where did it go before Rudolf II? And more importantly, who wrote it? For decades, the leading theory was that it was indeed a 13th century work by Roger Bacon, hidden in code to protect its dangerous scientific secrets from the Inquisition. Others suggested it was a forgery by John Dee, the famous Elizabethan magus and spy, or his associate Edward Kelly, a medium who claimed to speak the language of angels. They were known for their interest in Ionic, a celestial language they claimed was revealed to them by divine beings. Was the Voynich manuscript a sample of this angelic tongue? Or was it something much more grounded, a 15th century hoax designed to swindle a wealthy, eccentric emperor like Rudolf II? In 2009, a breakthrough occurred that shattered many of these theories. A team from the University of Arizona performed radiocarbon dating on the vellum of the manuscript. The results were definitive. The parchment was created between 1404 and 1438. This date effectively ruled out Roger Bacon, who died over 100 years earlier. It also ruled out John Dee and Edward Kelly, who lived much later. The manuscript was firmly a product of the early Renaissance. But this only deepened the mystery. If it was created in the early 15th century, it was produced with immense effort and at great cost. Vellum was expensive. The pigments used, lapis lazuli for the blues, expensive minerals for the greens, were not the tools of a casual prankster. This was a professional production. The script itself, often called Voynichese, is the true heart of the darkness. It doesn't behave like a fake language. In most hoaxes, the words are just random gibberish. However, the Voynich manuscript follows Zipf's law. This is a linguistic principle that states in any natural language, the most frequent word occurs twice as often as the second most frequent word, 3 times as often as the third, and so on. The Voynich manuscript adheres to this mathematical pattern perfectly. It has the structure of a real language, but with none of its familiarity. There are no I's or A's or thes that we can identify. There are word initial and word final patterns that are consistent throughout the book. Some words appear frequently in the herbal section, but never in the astrological section, suggesting that the text actually corresponds to the subject matter of the drawings. During World War II, the most elite codebreakers at Bletchley Park, the men and women who broke the Nazi Enigma code, spent their off hours staring at photographs of the Voynich pages. They failed. In the 1970s, the FBI's top cryptanalysts took a crack at it. They failed. In the last decade, high-powered neural networks and linguistic modeling software have been fed the manuscript. Some claim to have found patterns suggesting it's an abbreviated form of Latin, or a lost dialect of Turkish, or even a phonetic representation of an indigenous Mexican language. Yet every time a solution is published, it falls apart under the scrutiny of other scholars. No one can actually read a sentence. No one can translate a single paragraph that makes coherent sense. Why would someone spend years of their life and a small fortune in materials to create a book that no one can read? Is it a botanical guide to a lost island? A treatise on feminine health hidden from the eyes of a patriarchal church? Or is it a glimpse into a mind suffering from a very specific and very creative form of madness? As we sit here in the 21st century, surrounded by technology that can map the stars and split the atom, the Voynich manuscript remains a silent sentinel of the unknown. It reminds us that there are still holes in our history, black spots on the map of human knowledge where the light of reason cannot penetrate. As we conclude part 1 of this journey, we find ourselves standing at the edge of the Renaissance, looking into a mirror that reflects nothing we recognize. We have the dates, we have the history of its owners, and we have the physical object itself. But the soul of the book, the meaning behind the green pools and the alien flowers, remains locked away. In the next part of our story, we will dive deeper into the specific attempts to crack the code, the tragic lives of the men who went mad trying to solve it, and the new, terrifying theories that suggest the manuscript might not be a code at all, but something far more unsettling. The vellum is weighty, the ink is dry, but the mystery is only just beginning. To truly understand the weight of the Voynich manuscript, you must first understand the weight of a human mind, collapsing under the pressure of a secret it cannot share. If part 1 of our story was about the discovery and the physical reality of this strange book, part 2 is about the haunting. It is about the trail of broken reputations and shattered psyches left in the wake of those who thought they were clever enough to outsmart a 500-year-old ghost. Because the Voynich manuscript is not just a book, it is a mirror. When you look into its swirling script and impossible botany, you don't see the Middle Ages. You see your own obsession staring back at you. The first man to truly lose himself in these pages was William Romaine Newbold, a professor of philosophy at the University of Pennsylvania. In 1919, the manuscript was still a fresh enigma, and Newbold was considered one of the most brilliant cryptanalysts of his time. He didn't just look at the letters, he looked through them. Using a high-powered magnifying glass, Newbold claimed he saw something no one else had: microscopic shorthand characters hidden within the larger strokes of the ink. He believed the entire manuscript was a series of complex, microscopic ciphers that, when decoded, revealed the lost scientific discoveries of Roger Bacon. Newbold claimed the book described the use of microscopes, the structure of cells, and even the Great Nebula in Andromeda, centuries before modern telescopes were invented. For a moment, the world held its breath. It seemed the mystery was solved. Newbold became a sensation, hailed as the man who had unlocked the greatest secret in history. But as he dove deeper, his translations became increasingly erratic. He claimed to have found evidence of a 13th century secret society and apocalyptic prophecies. The strain of the work began to take a visible toll on him. He became reclusive, his notes a chaotic mess of overlapping theories. When he died in 1926, his colleagues began to peer into his work, only to find a tragic truth. The microscopic shorthand Newbold had spent years cataloging wasn't a code at all. It was merely the natural cracking and fading of the ancient ink on the rough surface of the vellum. Newbold had spent the final years of his life decoding the random patterns of decay. He had hallucinated a universe into existence, and the manuscript had led him. This is the Voynich curse. It tempts you with the promise of a logical solution, then leads you into a labyrinth where the walls shift every time you turn a corner. After Newbold's failure, the professional world of cryptology took the manuscript more seriously. During the 1940s, William Friedman, the man who famously broke the Japanese Purple Code during World War II and essentially founded the National Security Agency, decided to tackle the book. Friedman was a titan of logic, a man who believed that no code created by a human mind could resist the power of systematic analysis. Friedman gathered a Voynich manuscript study group consisting of some of the brightest minds in American intelligence. They applied the same techniques used to defeat the Axis powers. They looked for patterns, letter frequencies, and recurring structures. But after years of effort, Friedman, the man who could read the most secret communications of the world's most powerful empires, admitted defeat. His conclusion was both revolutionary and terrifying. The manuscript wasn't a simple substitution cipher. He believed it was an attempt to create a synthetic or philosophical language, an artificial tongue where the structure of the word itself expressed the nature of the object it described. In his final years, Friedman didn't solve the book. He simply grew to respect its silence. He even left a hidden message in his own professional papers, a subtle nod to the fact that some secrets are not meant for the living. But if the world's greatest codebreakers couldn't read it, perhaps the answer lay in the how rather than the what. In 2003, a computer scientist named Gordon Rugg proposed a theory that sent shockwaves through the academic community. He argued that the manuscript was a hoax, but not a simple one. He demonstrated how a 16th century swindler could have used a cardon grill, a piece of paper with holes cut into it, to generate a seemingly complex structured text from a table of random syllables. By moving the grill over the table, a scribe could produce pages of language that follow certain statistical rules without actually meaning anything. It was the perfect con, a book that looked like a profound scientific treatise meant to be sold to a wealthy, occult-obsessed monarch like Rudolph II for a king's ransom. For many, Rugg's theory was a relief. It provided a way out. If the book was a hoax, we could stop looking for meaning. But the hoax theory has a glaring weakness. It doesn't explain Zipf's law. As we mentioned in part 1, the Voynich manuscript follows the mathematical distribution of a real language with startling precision. If it is a hoax so mathematically sophisticated that its creator would have had to understand linguistic principles that wouldn't be formally discovered for another 500 years. Could a 15th century con artist accidentally create a perfectly balanced linguistic structure? Or is the code something so simple that we are overthinking it into oblivion? This brings us to the more modern and perhaps more grounded theories. Some researchers have moved away from the idea of codes and hoaxes and toward the idea of lost dialects. In recent years, scholars have suggested the manuscript is written in a phonetic script representing a dead language from the Mediterranean, or perhaps a form of Proto-Romance language. In 2017, television writer Nicholas Gibbs claimed it was a series of medical abbreviations for women's health treatments, essentially a medieval life hacker guide for the elite. In 2019, a researcher from the University of Bristol, Jared Cheshire, claimed it was a compendium of information on herbal remedies, therapeutic bathing, and astrological readings, written in a language he called vulgar Latin. Each of these men claimed the eureka moment, each claimed the mystery was over, and each time the specialized community of voynitologists, a group of volunteer researchers, linguists, and historians who have spent decades staring at these pages, tore the theories to shreds. The problem is always the same. While a researcher might be able to translate a single sentence or a few labels on a plant, the method they use never works for the rest of the book. The solutions are always selective. They require the researcher to ignore 90% of the manuscript to make the other 10% fit a preconceived narrative. The book remains a monolithic no. So, if it's not a code, and it's not a simple hoax, and it's not a known language, what is it? Some of the most haunting theories suggest that the Voynich manuscript is a product of glossolalia, the act of speaking or writing in a divine or angelic tongue, often associated with religious ecstasy or certain psychological states. Imagine a scribe in a 15th century monastery, perhaps a man or woman experiencing what we would now call schizophrenia or a temporal lobe seizure, who felt a divine compulsion to record a vision. They would write with the fluid, confident hand of a master because they weren't inventing the script, they were transcribing something they believed they were seeing or hearing. This would explain why the text has no corrections. It was a stream of consciousness from a mind that believed it was receiving the ultimate truth. Look again at the baunological section, the women in the green vats. If you stop trying to read the text and simply look at the images, a pattern of obsession emerges. The pipes, the tubes, the fluids, the repeated figures of the nymphs. It looks like a biological system. Some historians suggest it is a metaphorical representation of human reproduction, or the inner alchemy of the male body, hidden in a private visual language to avoid the prying eyes of the church. In an era where a woman's knowledge of herbs or the human body could lead to a charge of witchcraft, a secret book wouldn't be a puzzle. It would be a survival mechanism. But perhaps the most unsettling thought is that the Voynich manuscript is exactly what it appears to be, a window into an alternate reality. This is where the boring history of an old book becomes something akin to a cosmic horror. The plants that don't exist, the stars that don't align with our sky, the biology that suggests a different way of being. What if the author wasn't from our world? Not in the sense of an alien from another planet, but someone whose perception of reality was so fundamentally different from ours that their common sense is our impossible. As we stand here today, the manuscript resides in the Baranek Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University. It is kept in a climate-controlled vault, protected by layers of security. It is scanned, digitized, and available for anyone with an internet connection to study. And yet it is as distant as it was when Wilfred Voynich first pulled it from that chest in Italy. We have more data than ever before. We have AI models that can simulate millions of linguistic permutations in a second. We have carbon dating and multispectral imaging that can see through layers of ink. And still, the book says nothing. The Voynich manuscript is a reminder of the limits of human reason. We live in an age where we believe everything is searchable, that every mystery has a file, and every question has an answer waiting in a database. The Voynich code mocks that belief. It sits there, a collection of calskin and pigment, proving that even in our hyper-connected, high-tech world, a person from the 1400s can still keep a secret. It is the ultimate dark matter of history. We can see its influence, we can feel its weight, but we cannot see what it is made of. As we close this chapter on the world's most mysterious manuscript, we are left with a choice. We can see the Voynich manuscript as a failure of history, a broken link in a chain of human knowledge. Or we can see it as a masterpiece of the human spirit. It is a testament to our desire to record, to communicate, and to create.
even when the world we are describing is one that only we can see. The scribe who dipped their pen into that gall ink 600 years ago wasn't writing for us. They were writing for themselves, or for a god we've forgotten, or for a world that never was. The mystery of the Voynich code may never be solved, and in a way, that is the most beautiful thing about it. In a world where everything is known, the Voynich manuscript remains a sacred space for the unknown. It is a reminder that history isn't just a list of dates and battles. It is a vast, dark ocean, and sometimes things wash up on the shore that we are simply not meant to understand. The vellum remains cold, the ink remains dry, and the secret remains safe. For now, the manuscript returns to the shadows of the vault, waiting for the next person who thinks they are clever enough to hear what it's whispering. But remember the lesson of those who came before. When you stare into the Voynich stares back, and it never blinks.
Imagine, for a moment, that you are standing in a room filled with the world's greatest minds. Cryptographers who broke the Enigma code, linguists who map the evolution of Indo-European dialects, and historians who have spent decades in the dust of the Vatican archives. Now, imagine all of them staring at a single small vellum book, and all of them, without exception, admitting defeat. This is where the story of the Voynich manuscript shifts from a mere historical curiosity into a psychological obsession that has consumed lives and destroyed reputations. By the mid-20th century, the manuscript was no longer just a book, it was a challenge to the very concept of human intelligence. If we could build atomic bombs and reach for the stars, why could we not read a few hundred pages of medieval parchment? The story of the modern attempt to crack the Voynich code begins in the wake of Wilfrid Voynich's death in 1930. The book passed to his widow, Ethel Lillian Voynich, a famous novelist in her own right, and then to her friend Anne Nill. For decades, it sat in a sort of scholarly limbo, but the world around it was changing. We were entering the era of professional cryptanalysis. During World War I and World War II, the art of breaking codes became a matter of national survival. It was only natural that the men who spent their days deciphering the secret communications of the Axis powers would spend their nights dreaming of the Voynich. The first major figure to stumble into the Voynich trap was William Romain Newbold, a professor of philosophy at the University of Pennsylvania. In 1921, Newbold claimed he had found the key. He argued that the visible letters of the manuscript were a mere distraction. He claimed that under a microscope, the individual strokes of the pen were actually composed of tiny shorthand signs. According to Newbold, the manuscript was the work of the 13th century friar Roger Bacon, and it contained descriptions of astronomical observations made with a telescope centuries before the telescope was officially invented. For a brief moment, the world was stunned. It seemed the secret was out, but the boring history of reality soon caught up with him. In 1928, a scholar named John Manley proved that Newbold's microscopic shorthand was nothing more than the natural cracking of the ink as it aged on the vellum. Newbold had been staring at the cracks of time and seeing a language that wasn't there. He died shortly after, his legacy forever tied to a phantom discovery. This set the stage for the arrival of the heavy hitters. William Friedman is a name that commands silence in the halls of the National Security Agency. He is the man who cracked the Japanese Purple Code during World War II, a feat that many believe shortened the war by years. Friedman was a man of cold, hard logic. He didn't care about Roger Bacon or mystical shorthands. In 1944, he formed the Voynich Manuscript Study Group, composed of professional codebreakers who spent their off hours applying military-grade cryptanalysis to the text. They approached it as a substitution cipher, a transposition cipher, and even a polyalphabetical system. They looked for patterns, for the rhythmic heartbeat of a language they knew must be there. Friedman's conclusion was both revolutionary and devastating. He didn't think it was a code in the traditional sense. He proposed that the Voynich manuscript was an attempt to create an early artificial language. In the 17th century, philosophers like John Wilkins tried to create languages based on logical categories, where the structure of the word itself told you what the object was. Friedman suspected the Voynich was a precursor to this idea, but even he, the greatest codebreaker in American history, could not produce a single translated sentence. He left the project with a sense of quiet frustration, famously leaving a hidden message in his own bibliography that read, "The Voynich manuscript was an attempt to write in a synthetic language." As we move deeper into the 20th century, the boring history of the manuscript took a high-tech turn. In the 1960s, a man named Prescott Currier, a captain in the U.S. Navy and a cryptologist, noticed something that everyone else had missed because they were too busy trying to read the words. He looked at the handwriting. Currier realized that the manuscript was not written by a single person,
By analyzing the frequency of certain letter combinations, he identified at least 2 distinct hands, which he called Hand A and Hand B. They used slightly different vocabularies and different statistical patterns. This suggested that the Voynich wasn't the lonely diary of a mad hermit, but the product of a workshop or a collaborative effort. This discovery added a new layer of complexity. If it was a hoax, it was a multi-person conspiracy. If it was a real book, it was a standardized system shared by a group. But while the linguists were arguing over EVA, the extensible Voynich alphabet, the scientists were preparing a different kind of assault. For a long time, the dating of the manuscript was based on the style of the illustrations, the clothes, the hairstyles, and the botanical drawings. Estimates ranged from the 13th century all the way to the 17th. In 2009, the manuscript was taken to the University of Arizona for carbon-14 dating. This was the moment of truth. If the parchment was from the 19th century, Wilfred Voynich was a fraud. If it was from the 13th, Newbolt's Roger Bacon theory might have some life. The results were precise and undeniable. The vellum was produced between 1404 and 1438. This placed the manuscript firmly in the early Italian Renaissance. It was older than many had thought, yet too young to be the work of Roger Bacon. The parchment was made of calfskin, and testing showed that all the pages came from the same general time period. This was not a collection of scrap paper bound together later. It was a deliberate, expensive project. In the 15th century, vellum was a luxury. To produce a book of this size would have required the hides of dozens of calves and a significant amount of money. Whoever created the Voynich manuscript wasn't just doodling, they were investing a fortune. With the date settled, the focus shifted back to the most bizarre aspect of the book, the illustrations. To understand the boring history of the Voynich, you have to look past the mystery and look at the ink. There are hundreds of botanical drawings. On the surface, they look like a typical medieval herbal, a book used by physicians to identify medicinal plants. But there's a problem. Of the 126 plants depicted, only a handful are recognizable. There is something that looks like a sunflower, but sunflowers are native to the Americas and weren't in Europe until after 1492. There is a plant that resembles a dragonblood tree, but it is distorted, merged with other features. It is as if the artist was drawing plants they had only heard described in travelers' tales, or perhaps plants that only existed in a dream. Then there are the balneological sections. These are perhaps the most famous and baffling images in the manuscript. They depict small, naked women, often referred to as nymphs, wading in green pools or connected by a complex network of tubes and pipes. Some of these tubes look like human organs, like intestines or veins. Others look like chemical apparatuses. For decades, historians have debated what this means. Is it a treatise on women's health? Is it an alchemical metaphor for the refinement of the soul? Or is it a literal description of medieval spa culture? The nymphs are drawn with a strange lack of detail, their bodies functional rather than artistic, suggesting that the focus was on the process they were involved in, not the people themselves. This leads us to the big data era of Voynich research. In the last 10 years, computers have done more work on the manuscript than humans did in the previous 500. We have applied Zipf's law to the text. Zipf's law is a statistical phenomenon found in all natural languages, where the most frequent word occurs twice as often as the second most frequent word, and so on. Surprisingly, the Voynich manuscript follows Zipf's law perfectly. This is a massive blow to the hoax theory. To fake a language that follows the complex statistical distributions of a natural language in the year 1400 would have been almost impossible. The writer would have needed a computer or a profound understanding of mathematical linguistics that didn't exist yet. So the text has the structure of a language, but it lacks the features of any known language. There are no words with only 1 or 2 letters. There are no words with more than 10. There are strange repetitions. Sometimes the same word is written 3 times in a row. In any other language, this would be nonsense. In Voynichese, it is the rule. This has led some modern researchers to suggest that the manuscript is written in a phonetic script of a lost dialect, or perhaps a form of glossolalia, speaking in tongues, captured on paper. As we stand here today, the Voynich manuscript remains the Everest of historical mysteries. It sits in the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University, catalogued as MS408. You can go online and view every page in high resolution. You can join forums where thousands of amateur sleuths argue over the meaning of a single leaf or the curve of a letter. We have the dates, we have the chemical composition of the ink, we have the statistical maps of the text, and yet we are no closer to reading it than Wilfred Voynich was when he pulled it from a chest in an Italian villa over a century ago. The manuscript remains a mirror. The occultist sees magic, the scientist sees a code, the historian sees a lost chapter of the Renaissance. But perhaps the most boring and profound truth is that the Voynich manuscript represents the limit of our ability to know the past. It is a reminder that even in an age of total information, some things are destined to remain silent. The code isn't just in the book, it's in our own desire to find meaning where perhaps there is only a beautifully constructed 500-year-old silence. The question isn't what the book says, but why we are so desperate to hear it speak. And as the digital scans of its pages continue to circulate around the globe, the Voynich manuscript waits, holding its breath, for a reader who may never arrive.